Good morning on another beautiful sunny day. Today I'm going to start sharing some of the principles of supporting vertical growing in your garden. Many people, including myself, are limited in space, but it doesn't mean you can't produce a lot of food and other good things. Stay tuned. For many people, if you live in a city or suburban residence like I do, this is what your neighborhood looks like. There's houses everywhere. Here we are, my home, as you see, houses close together, and growing space is at a premium. Here's my front yard. Two narrow strips that you can grow virtually nothing, but don't let that stop you. There's still lots of ways to get things grown. An obvious way, and one of the oldest ways I've done it here, is to use the structures that you have, your buildings, and attach trellises directly onto the building. Here we see these fan-shaped trellises I've screwed onto the side of my deck, my house. And growing here are Arctic kiwi. Now, Arctic kiwi takes several years to get fruitful, but hopefully this year we're going to have some. They require both a male and a female. There's a male down below, and here's a female that's quite fruitful, quite lush in comparison. And as you can see, as we zoom in, flowers are starting to form up, and I expect the flowering to happen over the next few weeks. You can see how it's attached, and you can also see how I've had to improvise by making some additions with screws onto the house and snap ties, just tying some things together. This method can be used in many places and over your whole home if you'd like. Here's another structure that's built in already, and you don't have to do anything. All you need to do is plant along the edge. You got this beautiful fence, great sun, and great opportunity for vining crops. This is the west side fence, so it runs north-south, and I'll have great sun for 4 or 5 hours during the day. That's quite warm, and I haven't used it yet, but could in the future. Raspberry patch. Typically these canes would grow out and then flop over into the pathway, almost blocking the pathway. And it was great for the raspberries, but it took up a lot of space. So I've installed these T-posts, a T-post fence, T-post and clothesline fence all around, and so I can get access into the center of the bed, and it's going to constrain the raspberries vertically and give me much more space to work with the raspberries. As you can see how they're holding in, and then right in the middle here, this is my access into the inside so that I can harvest easily the whole bed. The whole concept of the beds is to have an internal grow zone that'll be partially shaded, and then an external grow zone, or bed, that'll get full sun, either early morning or in the afternoon. Now, predominantly, I'm using these beds for 2 crops. Sugar snap peas, which you see here. These are just about at the stage, about 4 to 5 inches. They're reaching up and starting to attach and they're going to grow up. Now typically I have not had adequate trellis for these sugar snaps. The plants themselves, with a little fertilization and water, they grow right into the fall, and they grow over 8 feet long. And normally after about 4 feet they flop over, crimp on themselves, the stems crimp and the stems die, and I get limited crop. Now they're going to be able to grow up, grow over. I get great access for harvest from the inside and out, and they'll be fully supported. Primary crop is pole beans. Now pole beans, if you don't know, they stop growing after they reach the end of their supports. And again, typically my previous supports were like 4 or 5 feet, so they would grow up and grow off the top of that 4-foot trellis, and then flop in the wind, stop growing. So these pole beans should be able to grow 8 to 10 feet. Again, fertilization, lots of water, and they're going to get great sun. I should easily be able to double my harvest of these pole beans and the sugar snaps using this trellis. For the cattle panel arches, which are about 7 feet tall at the apex and 7 feet across at the base, harvesting and working on the vines could present a challenge. So I had to do a bunch of research, and I came up with a nice solution. It's a combination of a heavy-duty platform. I'll show you from Halo. I'll show you how to open that up and use it. And a lightweight ladder, strong and lightweight, from Little Giant, that gives me access way up on top of the bed. Okay, so here I am. I'm going to set up my platform. Here's the platform. Basically, you undo the catches. Let's see. Oh yeah, it unsnaps, goes down like this, and actually we're going to use it like this. Those lock in place, and then I've got extensions, little feet that come out and lock in place. So there it is. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to place the feet on solid ground, place the extensions up on the side of the bed, and the feet, got to make sure it's balanced, it's solid. So there you go. Somebody could get up on that, stand up on that, and reach pretty much to the top. And if they can't quite reach, take this ladder, extend the ladder, set it on here. Again, fits on the platform, gives them a couple of more feet to get up to the top of the arch. Anyone wondering what in the heck's going on with these cans on the top of the T-posts? Not only is it artistic expression for the granddaughters and myself, but as I outlined for getting up on the ladders and stuff relative to these arches, I wanted to protect from anybody high up on the ladder from slipping and falling and gouging themselves on the sharp pointed ends of these T-posts. So it's all for security, but double purpose. Great artistic creations as well. In the trellis, you can see my hanging pots. Now, although I'm using these for flowers, you can see it's a vertical structure. This is being planted directly over garden beds, and it's increasing my output and harvest. In other areas, I can grow veggies or other plants, herbs that I'm trying to get productive in my garden beds. Those hanging pots, they're starting to come along. Another example of hanging baskets, again going vertical. I've got 6 hanging baskets here, chocolate mint and various other plants. Down at the end there, right in the center, you see this tree, Pollard. It's a Swedish columnar aspen that I was shading the garden too much, so I cut. I basically, well, I cut the bark around the base and left it for a couple of years to kill off the tree and most of the roots, and then cut off all the branches and chopped the tree at 7 feet. And they've just been sitting there, not much used, but this year I'm using them to grow vine and crops. And let me show you some details. Here you can see my sugar snap peas I'm going to grow, also pole beans, and a variety of spinach called red Malabar spinach that loves the heat and is also vines. So I put on blocks to provide space to stand off the chicken wire, and I screwed those into the trunk of this Pollard, and then applied chicken wire with staples, and there you go. You got a vertical growing support that I'm going to have maybe 8 to 12 plants growing upwards on it, and taking up only maybe 2 square feet of my garden bed that otherwise would be unproductive. Here's another thing that you can use: poles or posts, you know, holding bird feeders, bird houses, weather stations, many things. In your garden bed, you could do the same thing, putting chicken wire around it, and plants will grow. Using unused space. Now in my landscaping, I've got timbered terraces that are built of 8x8 timbers stacked, and then here I've got a pathway, and on the edge of the pathway, which is about 3 feet wide, I've installed 2 Eavestroughs. These Eavestroughs are down at a much lower level, so basically I've done it for the grandkids. Each of the Eavestroughs have holes drilled in the base about every 6 inches, like a 1/8 of an inch hole for drainage, and I've got some seed tapes of lettuce and veggie mixes that are just starting to come up. See, still got plenty of room for my pathway, and there's 2 beds I can use for lettuce, spinach, strawberries, many annuals, and even perennials. If I had to, I could pick up that whole trough and bring it into a warm garage or heated shelter over the winter. The method to support vertical is to use other various trellises. In this case, tomato cages, and I'm not growing tomatoes in them. They're in my hothouse, but you can see pole beans coming up down there that are going to grow up those trellises and then attach over onto my big arch and give them a lot of room to grow and expand. Another use of these tomato cages is here, where I'm supporting goji berries. Here's my goji berries just getting established. and they're going to grow up and be contained within this tomato trellis. Now goji berries, they tend to be long, floppy stems, and you know, if I just let it grow naturally here, it would take up like 10 to 12 square feet of space. But by containing it at 3 feet high within that circle, you know, overall it's going to be contained at 2 or 3 square feet, and allows me to underplant with something at ground level, increasing the yield even further. Here's a good example of another means of supporting vertical growing, and that is just incorporating permaculture principles of diversity and intensity and the various layers. So here, I don't really have a huge overstory tree, but you know, in some way that Swedish columnar aspen provides some benefits. But here I have a cherry tree, Evans cherry, underneath. I've got bee balm, there's bleeding hearts, and I've got various herbs, sunflowers, even leeks in its shadow. So in that one space, there's at least 3 different crops that are being grown. So that increases my space tremendously. A post and Eavestrough trellis that I've attached to this post. I've got a Virginia creeper on it right now. It does tremendously well, loves that spot. Originally I had clematis, but it got too much sun, grew too well, and killed itself because of the vascular inefficiency. I love clematis, so I moved it into a similar sort of position, a post with this trellis, this Eavestrough trellis, which goes around a corner. You can easily attach to a post or to a corner of a house. There's the clematis. It'll grow up, and in this case, it's a little bit shadier back here, and I can shade the roots, which it requires, and it does fantastic. Back to cattle panels. Here's my 4+ foot by 16 foot cattle panel, and originally I was going to stake it vertical on the west side of the house here. This side gets full, like 5 to 8 hours of sun, nice sun, it's hot, and lots of things grow here, and actually it gets kind of dry. Now before I did put these stakes in, I did a Alberta one call, which basically all the service providers come and paint on the ground where the pipes are buried and how deep. And fortunately, my gas is down at the back corner of the house, and it goes like right up the hill, right up to the front yard. So I couldn't stake in here without risking hitting the gas. So instead, I'm just doing a lean-to. This is just leaning against the house, and should be good. And what I've planted in here is some more of these Arctic kiwis, and also a non-suckering black raspberry. And you can see down here the kiwi, little geranium. Kiwi in the center is starting to do well. My black raspberry up there. As I go up the hill, the other plants seem to take. They're going to fill in this whole they're going to fill this whole trellis, and the weight of the vines should hold it in place. These independent vertical trellises. Here's one. Got my hot dog sticks hanging there right at the moment. But basically, this small patch, I planted 2 grapes, Somerset grapes. Hopefully they're going to take. And I've also got sunflower, and some other annual flowers. Looking for more space, one thing you might want to do is consider bags, grow bags or pots. Place them on top of walls, place them on the side of your steps so you don't need all the space. So here we've got grow bags with flowers, ground cherries, leeks, sunflowers, many crops. And you see it's layered, it's overarched by the bleeding heart, and on top of that, a tree cherry. On this side, this is my herb patch next to the fountain. All these herbs growing in a space that is unused but gets great sun and easy to keep track of because it's right by the door. All right, another way of supporting vertical growing is by in hothouse structures and twining inside to support the plant. And what will happen eventually is I'll attach some twine up to the rafters, and those strings will go down and attach into my tomatoes. There's some tomatoes. They're coming along, they're getting there. They're not quite there yet. And those are thermal mass to give me some frost protection. It actually provides like 2 to 3 degrees of frost protection, which I've proven through dual thermometers. And on this end I've got grow bags with different types of squash, cucumbers, sunflowers. Sunflowers actually popping up. Here I'm in the green space south of my property. You see that pollard with a chicken wire. You see the hot house with the arch over. Now the intention of putting the arch over the top of the hot house is that in the heat of the summer, my pole beans and sugar snaps will have grown up and provide shade into the hothouse, so keep it cool. But the other means, of course, is the door on the other side, and there's a window with an automatic opener that opens with heat. Here's my my eastern north-south facing cattle panel, and this one I was able to stake up. You can see the 3 stakes. It's zip tied, keep it in place. Those stakes are in the ground about 18 inches. What I've got here is thornless blackberries getting established and golden raspberries. And the intention is to grow them, not to allow them to flop all over, but to pull them back, attach them to the cattle panel. So I've got not only a vertical growing surface, but I've got a thin growing surface. I'll be able to access to the back, and it's not going to take up too much room. About the crops on these north-south facing things, you've got to be careful what you put in. Obviously, they're not getting tons of light all day, but they are getting multiple hours, so I think should be adequate. And you might want to look at species, as I have, that are more shade tolerant, and they should. Along with any considerations of trellises, another critical thing to support vertical as well as any growing is you have to provide an environment that's going to support any growth. That's light, water, and protection. And here in this environment, I'm in zone 3C. C stands for Chinook. And the Chinooks are strong winds, well over 100 kilometers an hour, that whip down from the mountains from weather systems coming from the west, and just pummel this environment. It's very warm wind, so in the middle of winter it warms up drastically, like 20 or 30 degrees Celsius, and we get these massive winds, and fools plants to coming to life and then desiccates them through the winds. And in my yard, between houses, as you can see here, we have two houses wide apart at the downhill side, close together, way up the hill. The winds come from downslope and go up, and they get funneled through here like a wind tunnel. So the winds are even higher. The winds tear off siding and roof shingles frequently. So it's a big problem. Valleys and ridges in this area, if they're east-west aligned, on the south sides, they typically are windswept, grassy, barren hillsides. But on the west side, where you're out of the baking sun and protected from the winds, they're lush forests. And the same thing happens here. So the environment that I need to provide is wind protection. And here I've got 3 evergreens that are growing up, a huge cotoneaster bush up at the top of the hill, as well as honeysuckle, crabapple, and apple trees that push the wind up, and in the lower down, next to this trellis, a beautiful growing space, and critical factor. An escaped raspberry I'll have to pull out. And but here's my fence, property boundary. On the east side, this gets a ton of light, and although I'm not using it at the moment, I am going to use it in the future by planting something that'll grow up. Maybe grapes, something perennial would be really nice. Species, here's some pioneer beans, bush beans, and pole beans. The pole beans will go up the arch. The other beans will stay down to the ground, although they do tend to ramble a bit. If you want to get more space, what you might need to do is concentrate on different varieties like beans that are pole varieties or sugar snaps that grow vertically versus bush varieties. Same thing can be said about your tomatoes, cucumbers, squash. A lot of those things you can grow bush variety, but pole variety or vining variety does just as well, and you can increase your yields 2 to 3 times per square foot by going vertical. I have one great opportunity for further planting on my property, and that is utilizing the boundaries. This utilizes not only my own property, because I'll plant the seeds on my side of the fence. And here we look right now, it's pretty grassy, but in that space behind the fence, there's 4 to 6 inches of space. And if I dig this out, I'll show you, then I've got a built-in great structure for things to grow up. It's protected from the winds, and it's going to be warm because this faces south-southeast, so it's going to get tons of sun, especially early and late in the season, and it's going to be warm. So I'm just waiting to see what's going to happen with some of these other structures, and then I'll be planting this area. So if you assume maybe 6 inches of width, I've literally got several hundred feet, and many times hundreds of square feet. That's going to be the equivalent of all of my grow beds inside, if not more. The property, and just for reference, here's a neighbor. We've been talking, and she's already dug out beyond the fence, and's got sugar snap peas planted. They're going to grow up on this fabulous. As I'm looking at these areas along my perimeter fences, I have to wonder how much impact would that have if I created beds and planted something. Well, I calculated it out, and there's almost 90 square feet of growing space along these fences. The total fence distance on my property is 180 feet, and when you work that out, that is the equivalent of 3.5 of my 4 by 8 foot garden beds in the garden. And when you take into account that I would plant beans or some grapes or something vertical, and you double or triple your yield vertically versus non-vertically, planting along this fence and others is the equivalent of 6 of my garden grow beds. Wow, that is amazing. Now, you might be asking yourself, what can I possibly do with these thin strips of land on the front of my yard? And here I've got a space that was solid gravel up until last year, and I decided, heck, why didn't I plant something there? I know in the winter, between the neighbor and myself, this area gets 7 foot high snow piles, but you know, maybe something will grow. So starting last year, I took cuttings from my raspberries, ones that I didn't want that were spreading like crazy, and rooted them and brought them up and threw them into this gravel. You can see that's like 4 inches of gravel over landscaping fabric, over crappy clay-rich soil. Actually, not much in the way of soil. And surprising to me, they all survived the winter. This spring I've added some others, and this year they're going to grow up. We'll have 3 to 6 foot high canes, and we'll see how they do. Over the winter, this was the tallest one. Man, when early spring came, it was frozen in ice. The ice finally melted. It looked totally lifeless, but actually I guess the snow and ice act as insulation, and they're doing great. So look at forgotten, unused spots on your property and make them productive. This also brings up another point: use other people's property. Now, not in a negative way, like try to cheat them, but as with this strip, it's 2/3 mine, 1/3 my neighbor's, I talked to the neighbor and said, hey, can I plant something here? And they were amenable. So yeah, here we go, establishing a raspberry bed. And down the road, I'll share the harvest with them and develop another growing bed that was useless. Another example of growing vertical, and that is using poles or stakes. In this case, it's supporting a multi-plum, but I've also used them to support sunflowers and to put a plant into a space that might not be able to grow due to wind and doesn't take up any room, very easy to move around, and very effective in tight spaces. This stairway gives you the idea, at least, of another means of supporting vertical growth, and that is stacking pots or plants or grow towers that you can buy of various sorts to stack, you know, 6 or 8 or 10 levels of plants with an interior core, and you can grow amazing amount of stuff on a very, very, very limited space. Another way to increase your output and available land is by growing taller, specifically with trees of various sorts. You can go way up and effectively increase your productive area per square foot dramatically, 2, 3, 4 times. Now, many people do just the opposite. They grow shorter and they top off the tree at 6, 7 feet so that they can reach all the fruit for harvest and pruning and stuff like that. But why do that? If you buy a couple of poles, you can get a pole, you can get the pruning gear where you can reach 12 to 15 feet easily from the ground, and you can buy poles with attachments that you know, sacks that you can use to go up and grab apples, for instance, and harvest easily. And of course, that's not to mention ladders and platforms. So on my cherry tree here, for instance, you know, it's about, you know, I have topped it a little bit, but it's about 10 to 11 feet at the moment. I'll probably let it go up, you know, another couple of feet. So 12 feet altogether. I'm just over 6 feet, and I can reach, you know, easily 2/3 of this with no ladders, and then with a simple 6-foot step ladder, I can reach all the rest, no problem. For harvesting my cherry and other fruit trees, I use a sturdy step ladder. This is a 6-foot, 1, 2, 3, 4 step ladder. I can get up 5 feet off the ground and reach up to about 12 feet. If you're going to use a ladder, make sure it's sturdy enough to hold your weight. Make sure you've got it solid on the ground. Maybe put a board down if it's soft ground, and make sure that everything is locked, which this one isn't. There we go. Now it's locked in place, ready to go. Look out this window. We see the deck, mountains beyond, beautiful. But I just want to point out another strategy for increasing your growth space is use your windows, your windowsills. It's a south-facing window, gets tons of light. Could easily grow herbs, strawberries, lots of plants on that windowsill. I mentioned windowsills. Here's another means to enhance even that. Build a couple shelves. Here we've got 1, 2, 3 layers of shelves with grow lights right in front of a beautiful south-facing window that I had hundreds of seedlings growing earlier, and over the summer I might grow some herbs in here, and stuff like basil that's very delicate and doesn't do well in our climate, and other things over the winter like strawberries that you know, I kept over the winter and continued to fruit for a couple of months. The deck, I've got some Chinese Fuchichi cabbage growing, and pansies, strawberries, geraniums. This is another principle. to support vertical growing. Look at, use your structures, use your fences, use your deck rails, attach things to the house or your buildings, attach things to trees or posts. By doing so, you can stack your harvest vertically and increase your effective growing space dramatically. Here's an overview of the backyard, just discussing one of the primary points of permaculture is your multiple layers. And you can see it better here. Here I've got a tree cherry, I've got hazelnut under its branches, just getting going. I've got raspberries and strawberries and some other herbs underneath that tree. Very effective. As you come around the corner, you see the same thing. Again, there's a plum tree over top of that bed where I've got radish, rutabagas, cabbage, onions, and on the outside I've got cherry bushes, Saskatoon berries, and even blueberries. So easily doubling or tripling my effective grow space. Same thing here. And etc. as we go down and look through the rest of the backyard. So that's it for supporting vertical growing. I think I identified 22 different simple methods to increase your space. You don't need an acreage. You don't need a huge lot. Suburban lot with application of some basic rules can give you a lot more space, 2 to 3 times. Use your own space, use your neighbor's space, use the public space. Put something right on the boundary. The roots will grow in all directions. Nobody will be any wiser except yourself. Have a great day.